Holy cow, Sam. Do you like this guy's accent? Isn't he great? He's like a little superstar. He's hanging out with the rock stars of London, and he's just coming here with all his charm. Wow, how beautiful.
He's a total superstar, and in the most literal sense of the word. I mean, if his work was appreciated the way that other people's work, say from the 70s on, from that British scene, it's got that vibe. You know, when I listened to it, I just felt right away, this fits right in with some of the best rock and roll from Britain, from the late 60s, 70s, but also current, also modern as well. And so, you know, if James Golding became an overnight superstar, I would not at all be surprised. He is that good.
He is that good. And he's really fun to look at and fun to listen to, fun to converse. And he's just lovely. His voice is so fun. You know, even his backdrop is fun. It's really such an honor to interview these true and real rock stars. So
he's such a cool cat.
Yeah. It's great to be with you, and it's great to be with him. Let's go see what else he has to say, all right? Oh, boy, Sam Morris. What the heck, man? How are you?
What's up, Fred?
It's all good.
You know what? I've been having one of those days where I'm just like neither here nor there, but now I'm here. Now I'm really here primarily because of getting to hang out with you two guys today. I'm super excited about this interview.
Before we get going, though, can you tell me where you are when you're not either here or there? Can you describe what that looks like for us? You know, some of us don't know what the difference is between being either here or there or wherever you were that wasn't either here or there. What is that called?
What does that look like for me?
Yeah.
For me, it's kind of in this apathetic bardo kind of space that I can go in from time to time. That is, I think, a byproduct of the overwhelming stresses of life and all of the various different components that need to be figured out.
Might overusage of psychedelics in your lifetime have something to do with it?
It might. Yeah, it might. We can look at that. Absolutely.
It's a contributing factor, Mr. Morris. I'm a doctor. I know.
I think we might have to start out this interview with actually a little therapy session here.
Well, we're already started, pal. The meter's been started already. We're on.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for days about the positives and negatives of the psychedelic experience and its incredible potential for the mind expanding, extraordinary beauty that it accompanies it. And then also the apathy that can come with wanting to actually engage with the material world after having
you're looking
such
at the apathy of an amorphous bardo to just start off an afternoon conversation. You're looking at like a deep, dark apathy of an amorphous bardo. Right. Dude, the average dude who's not done at least psychedelic 7 times in their life, he doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, just to let you know. Not even close. So, I hear about your apathetic bardo and everything, but, you know, but really, I'm glad you're here. I also want to add, did you land here or did you land there?
I might still be there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is here and what is there now? We need to really explore
Now we're finally at the introduction of today's conversation, I think. I think we've now reached the space where we better call in a third party because we're going to dig a pretty serious rabbit hole if they leave us just to you and I to our own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you haven't already hit the button to shut this podcast off at this point, please don't, because we're actually going to start to talk about some interesting shit here.
Yeah.
Rather than exploring this philosophical stupidity that we're currently exploring.
Philosophical stupidity, I say nay on that. This is the amorphous, amotivational, bardo of, what did you call it initially? You called it like
an apathetic bardo.
Apathetic, yeah. Okay. Apathetic bardo. I kind of like it. Is that related to Bridget Bardot?
Could be. I think apathetic bardo was Bridget Bardot's niece, I believe.
Yeah. Was Bridget Bardot from the UK?
we need to ask our fellow UK.
I know, that's what I'm doing
guy here.
That's exactly what I'm doing here.
Nice bridge, Fred.
I know, dude. This is where all my training comes in, where I start asking questions. I think she's not, but I do believe she's from Europe somewhere, and so maybe like France or something, Brigitte Bardot or something. I don't know, but possibly Mr. Golding. We have James. Sam, talk to me. Who is this James Golding guy who we got on our show today?
And James Golding is a man who continues to impress. I've known James for a number of years. I only just today, I mean, this is somewhat of an arbitrary marker, but I discovered that he's actually 57 years old, which kind of right? blew my fucking mind. I thought, no goddamn way. No way is this possible. James,
well, you know, time has a way of bending itself inside the psychedelic experience. So let's just let's get this again. Let's. Where the hell are you?
Let's explore, you know, something about James that I've just been discovering through listening to his music from his most recent album, Supernatural Glam. Mm-hmm. And that is that if I had listened to this album and no one had told me who it was, I would think, holy shit, the most rich parts of pop music, rock pop music from the 70s British era are alive and well. And what the hell am I hearing? This is absolutely incredible.
I agree. I took a listen to it, and the first couple names that came to mind, because all we can do is compare new experiences to our past, except when we're on psychedelics, and then we get it. But if when we're not on psychedelics, all we can do is compare it to the past. And so for a moment, I was not on a psychedelic, unless you include microdosing, because then I'm always on it. But let's just get going. Let's just get going with this. I noticed a lot of Bryan Ferry. I know a real lot of Bryan Ferry, actually. And I love Bryan Ferry. And I also really thought that Bryan Ferry was a unique sound. Like only Bryan Ferry, and Roxy Music could be Bryan Ferry. And then you start mixing in Iggy, and you start mixing in Bowie, and you start mixing in Beck, and you start mixing in all these players that really got encapsulated in this supernatural glam, at least in my past-based listening. What do you say to that? Anything? Are you just stoned, or
are you asking me, or are you asking James? Oh, you're asking me.
Yeah,
I was just thinking about the analogy of it being like, I mean, I've known James for a number of years, and he's always just been this beautiful soul. But it's kind of the analogy I would give is like a really beautiful woman who she suddenly takes off her makeup and shows you who she really is. And she's absolutely this most stunning supermodel that you've ever known. And it's like, holy shit, you're even more gorgeous than I thought you were. This is absolutely so incredible. Cool. I mean, the thing about James, and we'll let James actually talk here in a moment too, but for now we're just going to, talk about him rather than with him.
While they come into the theater. Yeah, I mean, they're just getting their popcorn and shit. So
the thing about James is he embodies such class that you would never necessarily know. Right. I mean, there's a level of humility and class that James embodies where, listening to the album, I'm like, oh man, he should be a total asshole. This guy should be an absolute rock star asshole who just goes around, screwing the girls and doing the drugs and, throwing the TVs out of the hotel rooms. And he's got the talent to justify that type of lifestyle. And there's very few rockers out there who have the talent to justify that lifestyle. There are a lot of posers out there who, they want to be able to have that kind of talent, but they simply don't embody that level of artistic genius that James embodies. So if I didn't know better, I would think, well, I knew James was a musician. I wouldn't have any idea that he was the type of guy who should be throwing the TVs out the window and screwing all the girls and doing all the drugs and being, the guy, But listening to this album, I'm like, no, he should be the guy. In fact, his biggest handicap is his own humility.
Yeah. Yeah, you start mixing this in with Live Regally, and you start mixing it in with the charm and the playfulness of this man, with everything that comes out of his mouth and everything that he represents and embodies. And it is a remarkable combination, with Live Regally and the almost the nastiness of supernatural glam, and then who he really gets to be as a 57-year-old, bringing an actual new sound into the genre.
It's true.
It's an extraordinary combination. And I'll bet you it has something to do with his upbringing, at least a little bit, that he can give a little bit of his upbringing, down in London. I can't wait to talk to him about that. I took a trip down there just a few years ago. And so I can't wait to discuss some of the things that were going on at his dad's clothing place. But before we get to all that, let's introduce this man. I mean, we're 9 minutes in. If you don't have your freaking popcorn yet, sit your ass down and enjoy yourself, because our guest today is James Golding. And James, welcome to the Insanity Podcast.
Thank you, gentlemen. I was just wondering, with all the superlatives that you've been describing and effusing over the last 5 minutes, I'm wondering who this wanker is. And it looks like the show is going to go downhill right from this moment.
Most of our shows aren't published because we can't get them published, because it goes here and then goes downhill. So, welcome to the club.
Thank you. And I was actually really enjoying your playful introduction and bar talking. I actually would like to admit that I understood every single word that you were talking about.
Oh, that's great.
That's without psychedelics.
I doubt it. I challenge that. There's no way. I mean, you could say it, but if you understood us, pal, you've done your share of psychedelics.
I think what he's saying is this is entirely with Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Is it not?
Oh, he's a Buddhist. He is a Buddhist. He's right. I read that.
He's tapped in. This is another area. See, his grace and his class prevents you from knowing the depth of James Golding. So
that's so true.
Tell us, how is that accessible to you, James?
The dude just traffics as a bodhisattva all day, every day. I mean, like all day, every day. He's in between realms. So, James, what the hell, man? What is this music, and what are you doing, and what is Live Regally, and how does London fit into your life? And welcome to Insanity, and the floor is yours. Thank you for being here. And what do you got? What do you got for us today?
Those are big questions. I don't quite know where to start, but I'd like to say that I'm really essentially just a blue fly clinging onto the tail of a thoroughbred horse. And, sometimes the blue fly, if you're a little blue fly, and this is where I'm at right now, traveling with you on the horse. I don't feel I'm astride of the horse. I'm just the blue fly clinging onto the tail. And if you're a blue fly...
The horse's ass pretty much is what you're talking
the thing
about.
Is, if you're a blue fly clinging onto the tail of a thoroughbred horse, where's the best place to cling on? Is it going to be at the bottom of the tail, which is kind of swishing all over the place? Or is it going to be at the top of the tail? And I believe that the top of the tail is the best place. And the problem is that if you're at the top of the tail, that's where pretty much all the proverbial comes out, the waste material.
The bullshit.
But
horse shit.
Being a blue fly, it absolutely loves this. And so...
so am I the horse's ass, or is Fred the horse's ass? Are we both
between the two of us,
we're both a horse's ass.
We're embodying a horse's ass all the time.
Yeah, I think that's about accurate. Yeah.
I'm the left cheek, you're the right cheek.
or maybe you're the blue flies with me as well. We're all in this together. And it's a wonderful journey. And it doesn't really last very long. It can be in the blink of an eyelid. I was talking to somebody today, actually, Count Prince Stash, who you may know,
yes,
one of the distinguished fellows in our, Leaders of Humanity program we call METAL. And we were talking about his journey as a father, and he was pretty much saying, I remember, he was talking about his son, and I don't know if I'm at liberty to share something about his life, but I'll go ahead. And just saying that, I just remember yesterday he was cradling in my arms, and then suddenly he's this massive man who's a foot taller than him and making his progress in the world. So that's kind of, things move fast, and especially when you're having fun. I'm sure, we're already like halfway through the program, correct? And
did we get there? No, we're keeping you for a long time, man.
No, you're looking at a couple hours. If you got to go get dinner or something.
We're holding on to you.
Right.
Okay. This is not. There's no exit. You could check out, but you can never leave.
Yeah,
it's just how that goes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing me on this to explore supernatural glam.
We'll reserve that sentiment until later.
Yeah. I would hold back on that shit. I would hold back.
I'm the blue fly. I'm the blue fly. I'm enjoying. I can enjoy everything that the horse and the buttocks are throwing at me.
The buttocks. I like that. What is the deal with your upbringing? Of course, we could come after supernatural glam, and of course, we could come after, live regally. We got that, and we both know that, and we're not going to get out of this show without really taking a peek at that. But can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up as a little kid involved, in the place where Pete Townsend picked off his pants every week? What the hell is that? Talk to me.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely true, of course. And as my father says, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. But essentially, I grew up on the King's Road in Chelsea, London. And the King's Road, Chelsea, was the epicenter of British youth culture, music and fashion from the 60s, literally to the naughty 90s, before it became homogenized as sort of high street, it's a high street. But down the King's Road from the 60s, you would get the rock sound, the rock fashion, the psychedelic fashions, the kind of presence of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, who had apartments, in Chelsea, and all the fusions that went with it, and Twiggy and the London swing of 60 mini skirts and stuff. And then, music and fashion very much integrated, and expression of youth culture. And then that kind of morphed into the 70s with, glam, and then later mid-70s punk, and then new wave, and then there were the new romantics and even, the goths. And then there was, within the British and London culture, was our sort of the Commonwealth empire amalgamations of multidimensional cultures. So you had the kind of African and Jamaican and Caribbean sort of roots and reggae influences there as well. So there's this wonderful, mesh of different scenes and music and fashions and different sort of gangs, and at different times. And essentially growing up on the King's Road, I was kind of party to, seeing all this.
Party, for sure.
Walk by. The other dimension here is that my father, Peter Golding, also known as the Eric Clapton of denim, invented the stretch jean in the 1970s.
No kidding.
And became a sort of prominent sort of designer and fixture of the fashion scene. And then also had a shop called Ace, which was on the King's Road, which was defined as the hottest shop in the world. It was the kind of very bespoke, glam, sparkly, rag and the jeans and the T-shirts and the fixtures and the gorgeous women that were serving. It was like everything sparkled and glittered, and the music. I mean, they had amazing speakers and music in it, and it was just like the soundtrack of my life. And people from the Rolling Stones to Queen and David Bowie and Rod Stewart, and even got a photo.
The Who, right? The Who too, right? I mean, did the Who hang out at your place, or did the Who have their own clothier?
I don't know about the Who. I'd have to check with my father about the Who.
So it's basically a bunch of unknowns.
But I do have a story, and then you got a few ladies actors, lords and punks, and it was a whole kind of mixture of people coming in and out to get kind of special stuff, and it was just at the height of that sort of glam punk era on the King's Road. And I was part of that as well. And we actually lived off the King's Road, and my father had a few other parties as well.
Yeah, I guess.
And so the problem I had was, as well as really enjoying and, at the time, you're not necessarily aware of history being made, but definitely fusing with that. I kind of had this larger than life experience. And in the later years, I sort of lamented that the blessings could also be a curse, because I'd had nothing to rebel against. I hadn't, I had to, it was almost like me having to sort of like keep my father, who was dominated as the sort of almost the sixth Rolling Stone, and just keeping all that in check. So, in my early 20s was looking for something a little bit more structured and guided and maybe disciplined to sort of orientate my life and compass.
Rebelling against that would be like going to grad school and getting your MBA or something like that, and wearing like a straight, a nice suit and tie, essentially.
Yeah.
Although that was definitely not in my genes, literally. But I think there was a sort of an inner search to find some sense of order.
Isn't that fascinating?
Not necessarily order, but just a sense of meaning and compass and foundation for all the extraordinary multidimensional ideas and thoughts and paradigms that existed. The other thing I'd like to say is that my mother was actually born in Morocco, in Fez, Morocco, from kind of North African, Spanish, Jewish, French origins. So from, a very distinguished family from the 15th century. So we have that kind of roots and passage going on, and the culture associated with that, and kind of a lot kind of warmer and heartfelt and soulful. But, my father's father was a very, very upstanding man, Dr. S.R. Golding, who was a Shakespearean scholar, a headmaster, and a chief examiner in English, marking papers of international students in English on the Oxford-Cambridge board. So there's all this kind of juxtaposition of rock and roll and flair and fancy and glam. And then there's the kind of more maybe, supernatural, soulful, erudite, principles and values that are going on there. So it all gets into a wonderful, confusing and magical mess.
That's fabulous. Wow. It's like, I read 200 and something pages of a 300 and something page biography of a man who I imagine you at least had a relationship with incidentally, but maybe even directly. And that was Richard Branson. Like Virgin Records also grew up in London, and probably not so many blocks away from where you were, before Richard Branson decided he and the Sex Pistols and all this shit that he had to go through in order to create the whole ethos of Virgin. Was there? It looks like you're shaking your head affirmatively. Did you have some experience with Richard Branson as you were growing up? Or did your dad, perhaps? Am I in the right era? Is it the right ballpark?
Yeah, I'm sure my father, met Richard Branson. I met him indirectly at a party that I actually later on became an impresario and club organizer, organizing live music for a very famous club called the Café de Paris, which has been at the center of London social scene. So that's another story and another lifetime. But yeah, we helped organize a Virgin party, and Richard was there. That was kind of more, after his kind of initial success. But the thing about Richard, and I want to go back to, throwing TVs out of a hotel room, as you did mention it. And sometimes, Sam, there's a sort of a love-hate relationship with wanting to be the arrogant, larger-than-life rock star. We kind of wish that we could have been that, having lots of, the ladies and, at our every whim, and being able to do whatever we want and say, put two fingers up to the world. And, Richard Branson was definitely not the guy that threw the TVs out. He was the accountant, actually. He was the accountant. He was the man that was very solid in terms of his business dealings and ideas, and was able to hold, because the music industry was literally a, very flamboyant bunch of retrogrades, and didn't really have any sort of business and legal structures around it in terms of people being ripped off and stuff. So I think Richard Branson was a very sort of balanced and maybe, not so emotionally involved in that, but, and kind of evolved and was on the pulse of really London's, all the different scenes of London and youth scenes. And he was able to sort of like put some order to it, package it and get it out there, and had a few successes accordingly. The other thing I want to say, since you did mention Bryan Ferry, is I once heard,
Definitely.
This is absolutely true, whilst Keith Moon or someone from The Who would be throwing out the TVs and the furniture out of the hotel room, Bryan Ferry, in his very demure, artistic, sophisticated style, would be the kind of person that rearranged the furniture within the hotel room.
That makes sense, sort of. It's like there's something so, you know what? I guess I want to point to you and Bryan Ferry, especially with this story, because there's something gorgeously sweet about Bryan's voice. Like Bryan's singing from the neighborhood. He's singing from the hood. He's definitely singing from the streets of London. And there's, them and the New York Dolls. And, there's like a whole genre there for which Bryan Ferry hits my heart. Like I get, those guys are screaming. They're screaming, but Bryan has a glorious musicality to his voice. And I really hear that in your music and Supernatural Glam. How big of an influence was Bryan Ferry to who you now have become as a musician?
Well, Bryan Ferry is very, very much one of my influences, and I'm really glad that you've been able to kind of identify the nuances of his voice. And as I kind of identified in some of my interviews, I'm very much affiliated with the best of British, and particularly the Bees, the Beatles, Bolan, Bryan Ferry, Bono, and and the list continues. And Blur.
Eno too. Brian Eno, no?
Brian Eno and Blur as well, the kind of more, sort of 90s sort of mod pop.
Boy George.
Fantastic, thank you. And then a fusion with Bond and the Buddha, of course, and a bit of Beethoven, if we want to throw the Bees in. And that
you got to throw it. You got to throw Leonardo.
Let's start with Bryan, because, and I think actually in recognizing all of those artists and voices, there was something about their voice that was, I would say, was sort of rock crooner. It wasn't sort of graspy, sort of, that kind of raspy rock voice like, Rod Stewart or Robert Plant, or those, iconic lead singers. There was something quite suave and sophisticated, quite crooner and quite kind of loungy about it, and there was a kind of very warm texture, and they had their own, so it was very accessible and listenable, but also had a very incredible technique and style behind it, even though it may not have been practiced as such. So for me, that was that kind of musicality and that kind of artisticness and refinedness that came through the voice, but also in terms of the music and what they were trying to share and identify. But I would say that all those singers had their roots in blues and soul and jazz and the American Afro-American influence, but then fused it into kind of that British eccentricity and cultivation, which is quite kind of identifiable as a British sound. And the same with Boy George and to an extent Bono as well, even though he can really belt it out, there's still a real kind of like smooth cleanness to that. And I suppose maybe that was just what came out of my mouth, and it's sort of like, okay, that's my voice too, but it takes time to develop.
So lead us through that transition. I mean, you're immersed in this world from basically the time you're born, and you're just absorbing these influences, where a lot of kids are growing up and absorbing Mickey Mouse and, whatever else. You're absorbing David Bowie, and you're absorbing Mick Jagger. And this is just your world that you're exposed to from the time you're born. You don't even know of any other world. So lead us through that process of taking it all in as a sponge. And then when did you begin to realize, this is something I'm finding my own expression from this. This is in my DNA now, and I'm a natural extension of this. When did that begin to happen, or when did the flames of inspiration begin that created the artistic expression that is today's James Golding?
Thank you. Great. It's wonderful to be given the opportunity to spew forth, and I have to kind of like just rewind my mind and sort of go back to, the
Yeah, there's no way that you could have been expecting that level of a sophisticated inquiry coming out of Sam Morris, given where this whole conversation started. So take your time to adjust. Take your time to adjust, because that's rock. That's crazy shit right there,
chaps. And we're just talking about this lifetime, right?
Yep, this lifetime.
Yeah, I suppose. We got to stick within the parameters of this incarnation. Yeah.
One lifetime at a time, right? Okay. Right. So,
I mean, if you do want to explore past life regression and talk about some of the other impacts, I guess we can go.
Then let's just schedule them for another show.
Episode 2. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, just
if you want to touch base in a previous or future life, go right ahead. Just don't go there and stay there.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Just for the record, what I am today and what I am here is as a result of all the causes in the past. So
sure,
we know that.
That kind of all brings it very nicely and compactly into the here and now. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is at the time, I mean, I think most of us can relate to this. Certainly, we're young. At the time, we're just experiencing whatever's being thrown at us, from our parents, our environment, our schools, our teachers, the
back of a horse. Whatever.
Yes, the cultures that surround us. And we're not necessarily aware of how much this is impacting us or coming. Yeah, I avoided that one because I don't want to destroy my flow here. So, yeah, we're not necessarily aware of what is kind of going on and being assimilated in inside us while it's going on. But there are times where things just start to feel like, wow, this is something that amazing is going on here. It's maybe it's just a joy, a recognition, a sort of happiness in the heart, and it can be very simple things. And then also, depending on our elders and teachers and whatever, philosophies or education, sometimes a teacher or somebody will say, hey, this is really important. Your future is really important. You are important. You're special. So really start to think about what you're doing and what is your goal and what is your dream. And so anyway, that's a sort of a general overview. But in terms of my individual experience, I would say that yes, I was immersed in many different flavors and experiences. And as I said, music was a very, very big part of our kind of landscape and soundtrack. I mean, if I say that, I remember very much. My father had a Mini Cooper S. It was like a wooden picket Mini Cooper S. The black windows, the Mini, and it was really cool, and wooden steering wheels, and it was really really sexy, really cool. And he had this 8-track cartridge cassette player, and the speakers were amazing. And literally, we would be just sort of blasting all over wherever we went, blasting. I had one brother at the time, another brother came later, but we'd just be blasting around London in this tiny little leather-seated Mini Cooper S top windows, and the cartridges we had were Rolling Stones, Beatles, Bowie, Elton John, Pink Floyd, Neil Young, Eagles.
How about Jimi Hendrix? Was Jimi Hendrix part of your deal?
Jimi Hendrix, The Doors.
How did you wait till the 10th person to actually describe that you had some contact as a child?
I don't know.
Did you have contact as a child with Jimi Hendrix?
I don't want to psychoanalyze that right now, but
okay, no problem. Yeah. I am a psychiatrist, you know that. And I sorry about the lead-in question, but I just got to know, did you have early contact with Jimi Hendrix when you were less than 10 years old? Did he give you $1 or some shit like that ever?
No, but I know people that did. And there's definitely, Jimi Hendrix is definitely part of our heritage.
That's awesome.
And, to be honest, I was more into... Jimi Hendrix came later when I actually just got mad about the guitar. Before then, I was into the song. I was into the melodies and just the way a whole music symphony would be exposed. And I think that was the kind of symphonic nature of being in London and the that 70s period and the backlash of the 60s. It was so colorful. There's so much going on. There was so much unique individual expression, and it wasn't one box. It was just like everything. So maybe in terms of music, I like that kind of bigger kind of, exposition. But the other thing is that I was at a sort of like traditional school, and I was playing classical music. And the other thing is that my father was a musician as well. He was like a folk bluesy guitarist. In fact, going a little bit further back, so there was music around us. He was playing. There were guitars.
Donovan, was he back there in the same kind of area?
Yeah, Donovan was, he was the Bob Dylan, the British Bob Dylan. not quite the same. Oh yeah, and Bob Dylan and that whole thing. But I think it was the Beatles that really got, Sgt. Pepper and that kind of like massive soundscape that got me. But my father, there was music around. My father actually, in his early 20s, was the manager of a big factory, clothing. He was in the clothing, and he was offered an even bigger job, and he decided he didn't not to take it, and he went on a scooter with his mate, and they literally spent 6 months busking in Paris as beatniks, and then they drove 3,000 miles to down to Europe and Middle East, and ended up in Jerusalem, which was like his kind of gypsy spirit. And so he actually earned his bread by busking in Paris, and he's a harmonica player, so kind of playing guitar and harmonica, and so music and the joy of music was kind of part of our vernacular. And then so that was that. And there's a story, fast forward, my father, who's now, I believe he was featured in the top 100 harmonica players of the world.
Amazing.
Wow.
He's actually just released his own album, which is, Cafe Django?
Your dad.
Django Reinhardt, Gypsy Jazz Homage, where he's playing swing harmonica, which is quite
incredible.
rare. So he's featured
That's
there.
awesome.
Yeah, so music was there in the landscape, and then not only just also the fashion and the glitter and every, it was embodied in people's life and clothing, and that was all going on. And
it's a whole lifestyle.
And all the people there. Yeah. It wasn't just the music, it was the whole
culture,
multidimensional thing there. So that's really also what I, try to, and actually just fast forward, it's not until now even, or the last few years, that I've realized all of this kind of heritage, all of this infusion, all of this culture and experience that I've had actually, has something very rich and meaningful. And I kind of like, channeled, in many cases, I'm channeling that spirit and that energy, not just of myself, but maybe of the pulse of youth itself, the pulse of art, the pulse to, expand beyond limits, the pulse to sort of engage and create something meaningful and beautiful and good in the world.
Yeah, clearly
doing it.
Clearly, I mean it when I say that your sound and your compositions, your singing, your playing, it's like you are. It's more than like you are embodying the same DNA of that history and the culture. It's so clear that, a lot of people could maybe do a copycat version of it and get close. Maybe they get 90%, but there's a 10% in that sort of intangible, ineffable kind of vibe that you're just not quite hearing. But like I said earlier, if I put on this record, I'm right there. I'm fully immersed in the culture, and the DNA is fully present in that music. Now, you mentioned that you studied classical music. Who was your sort of, did you have a pop music mentor of sorts other than your father? Was there someone who sort of took you under his wing or did you just kind of absorb a lot of different influences from a lot of different mentors? How did that work?
Yeah, I think, thank you. Yeah, we're sort of going back to the original question. Yes, I'm kind of getting into more detail of the actual kind of intricacies of the path. Essentially, I think that was part of the educational curriculum of music. You sort of learned the basics of classical music. I remember playing a Spanish guitar when I was 4. My father even has a picture of me. I played Au clair de la lune, French song, if you just in case for the listeners who maybe have an American-centric view. And that was my first performance. And then it all went kind of pretty neutral from there. I went to school, started playing recorder and then violin, and it was like a very strict kind of classical music teacher that we were going through the disciplines of being in an orchestra and playing together, which I think I now look as invaluable, because you have to listen and see yourself as part of the symphony and work with others and listen with others. So that came into play. And then I sort of played a bit of trumpet, but it was only really, I think it was about around the age of 13 where suddenly it kind of like, rock music, even though the influences have been there with my father and all the, all the things that are going on in the shop in the King's Road, there was something about me suddenly connecting with my own kind of musicality of feeling like, hey, I kind of want to do this myself, and I want to start, getting into that kind of magical, powerful experience, and I can, I think there was that feeling, I can, rather than it just being a wish. There was a sort of like, okay. And so the other thing is that while I'm getting into this, I've got a couple of friends at school that are also starting to get into, the electricness of guitar and rock music. And particularly it was kind of heavy rock music that was kind of like really, really got us fired up. And so, bands like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and, AC/DC were kind of anthemic AC/DC kind of blues rock. Those kind of things were starting to like be part of our kind of classroom little group or little gang. And then it was, around 14, 15, we're starting to sort of compete against each other, who can, do the best solos and who's the best. And then little bands and factions are being formed. And so, that's when my father sort of steps in and sort of gives me an acoustic guitar, which I didn't really want to do acoustic guitar. I wanted the electric, but he said, no, you have to start on the acoustic first. And the other thing is that I am left-handed. I'm very, very, very left-handed. I was a left-footed footballer, proper football, remember, and left-handed. And so we had to turn the strings upside down. The nut on the thing, it was all over the place, and it was just really hard to play acoustic guitar, with the strings change around. And it was, but anyway, it was good because I had to kind of really crunch into learning the basics. And then when I'd done that, my father gave me a few things, and I was just sort of picking stuff up with curiosity and not doing any homework. That's kind of where it all started. And then the electric guitar, we found an electric guitar, bought my first Marshall.
I have a real question, and actually this question goes to both of you. And you're both extraordinary guitarists, and I really just want to honor that. First of all joking aside, extraordinary musicians that I'm here with, both of you. And one of the things that I've been doing is in my back of my head while you're speaking, I've been aging you. Like, what year, how old were you when Sgt. Pepper came out? What was going on when you're 13? What happens when you get to be 13 and like when you're 13, it's 1977, and you're a 1964 baby.
63.
Okay. 63. So 1976, which is the year I graduated high school. And this is my point. My point here is you're both so timeless. Like, the essence of this music looks like it grows organically right from how you play and who you be. But in your case, James, you're 3 years old when Sgt. Pepper comes out, apparently having a massive influence on who you are as a musician. And then by the time you're talking 1976 or 77, Led Zeppelin 4 is long behind us. Queen is long behind. We're talking, you're already 3-4 years after Queen and Led Zeppelin 4. We're into Houses of the Holy. We're into the next genre of, American Graffiti. We're all, we're really just going all over the space. But, this question becomes even more amplified when I take it on with you, Sam Morris, which is you're always shocking to me, given the fact that you're another generation younger than James Golding, and yet you embody this music as if it showed up while you were growing up. When, in fact, the only one of us three that knows how this shit showed up when you were growing up is definitely me. Okay, I'm old enough to actually watch that stuff, to be in line at 8 a.m. when the music store opens up so I can buy that 45. Like, I am buying something, and Revolution or something, I'm buying that when it shows up. I'm buying I Am a Walrus in Strawberry Fields when it shows up. You guys aren't even born yet, and you're barely born. James, you're like, you're getting a pacifier out of your mouth when something shows up. The Beatles are ready to break up when you're 6. It's like, how does this become so organic? And literally, I'd like to ask this, Sam, if you can take on this as a guest answer as well. Like, how does this become so much part of your DNA when you really, honestly weren't there when it was launched?
That's a great question. And thank you for asking it. So my own personal journey into the past, if you will, came from my guitar teacher, and when I started playing guitar at the age of 11. And so me being born in 1975, the age of 11, so we're talking 1986, I get my first electric guitar. And at that time, my music that I just loved to listen to was the 80s metal bands. I was into Motley Crue and Rat and that type of stuff, the LA bands from the 80s. I brought that music to my guitar teacher, who was this awesome guy. He was probably in his mid to late 30s at the time, but he seemed ageless to me. He seemed so much older and more wise and weathered. And this guy he and I would hang out in this room about the size of a storage closet and do lessons together. And he'd be chain smoking Winston's with his black leather jacket on. And he's like, Sammy, you just bring me whatever you want to play, and we'll talk about it, and we'll figure it out. So I brought him Motley Crue, Smoking in the Boys' Room, and he listens to it, and he doesn't judge it. He learns how to play it. He takes it sort of as his homework to teach me. Comes back, teaches me how to play it. But soon after, he says, Sammy, he says, if you really want to learn how to play this stuff, you really want to develop an appreciation for where these guys learned their stuff, where they learned to play from. He says, so if you want to learn about, these 80s, or, at the time, if you want to learn about Motley Crue, what we should really be doing is we should go back to some of their influences. We should be looking at Led Zeppelin. We should be looking at Jimi Hendrix. We should be looking at Cream. And so he transitioned me to Led Zeppelin, Cream, Black Sabbath, Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan. And so he created this pretty immediate bridge for me. And the next thing I know, I'm like, oh, wait, this stuff doesn't even resonate with me anymore. All that all seemed like sort of artificial. And what I started to get was the source. And I started to connect with the source, where I felt like the 80s stuff that I was interested in was more artificial and more kind of posery. And I started to tap into the energy that was actually coming from that source. So I became more interested in the source than in the artificial version. And not to say, for any Motley Crue fans out there, I apologize, forgive me, but there was something so raw and real about the Zeppelin and the Hendrix and the Cream. And so I just became more interested in it, and I started to connect to it. And it, that happened at such an early age, at the age of 11, 12 years old. And so it's now just natural to me to feel that vibe.
That's a beautiful answer. I love that. And I really thank you. A really gorgeous answer. James, is that something that resonates with your history too? Or how is it that you're able to go back at least half a generation and pick off Cream or pick off Procol Harum or pick off, even the bands that preceded Black Sabbath, AC/DC, Deep Purple, and Led Zeppelin, etc.? How are you able to go to source? Well, I'm going to call Led Zeppelin source, by the way. I'm not going to include them in the other 3 bands that you named there. But nevertheless, I am asking you, how is it that you're going back to source Brian Eno, for instance, or source David Bowie? Like, what's really going on? Ziggy Stardust is created on the year you were born or something like that,
I think it's a really great discussion and some really, really interesting themes. I think there are some common themes that we can connect with. But first of all, I'm very impressed with your anthology and your memory, Fred, just the way you're able to kind of
this is my life.
List those albums, year after year, and kind of name them. And there's probably other artists too.
Look, I want to tell you, it's nothing to be proud of. It's just what I live to eat and breathe.
I'm sure you could list every one of Frank Zappa's 52 albums. Well,
I like Frank. I like Frank quite a bit.
But I don't know.
But even Procol Harum and Cream, I had a brother 10 years older than me. And so he's the one who introduced me to Clapton. He's the one who introduced me to the Yardbirds. He's the one who introduced me to Rod Stewart and Jeff Beck. I mean, I was really playing around with Faces when I was 5.
Yeah.
When I was 5, I was playing those games. But that's why it's kind of odd to imagine you guys having to go, frankly, to the light. Now here we are talking about incarnations, but having to go to prior to you being born to find source.
Well, okay. I think there's a simple way of answering this. I think that's universal. I mean, obviously we have our own journeys, but as Quincy Jones said, there are 2 types of music. There's good music and bad music. And essentially everyone has their own subjective view of what that is. But I think there's something about music and source and sound and kind of like the sincerity and the depth of life itself that kind of, pervades through all kinds of music and all kinds of form from whatever age, even my appreciation of classical music, or not even appreciation of it, but seeing something there and seeing people magnificently want to perform it and portray it. And then even with kind of jazz music and the 20s and then there's blues music and there's rock and roll, there's something really authentic about that expression. And I think that was kind of embodied in my father, probably embodied in my mother as well, with even kind of Moroccan music and French chanson. And so there's this sort of a timeless aspect to being able to appreciate the qualities of something that has kind of depth and richness, but also virtuosity and class to it. And I think that was kind of maybe part of our sort of British heritage and institution. We're all quite, I'd say, one of the aspects of British, apart from it being a sort of a hooligan, sort of brute, barbarian nation, it does have a sense of sophistication and finesse and appreciation of the good things and the finer things. And maybe this is a European quality as well. And there's been so much history involved in that, whether it's music or language or fine costumes, but probably even more the values of life itself. And I think in many cases that's also my grandfather's sort of heritage as well. They had such sort of valued principles and that kind of like appreciation of depth and something that's real comes through. So, yeah, I mean, pick your trade, pick whatever endeavor you want to, you get, and there's also this sense of the master disciple relationship. I think it was a lot more prevalent then, that if you wanted to learn a craft, you learn from the masters, and the disciples or the pupils are the embodiments of the masters. And so, if you think someone's great, then you go back to, the source from there. So, and I think my father was also sort of drilling it into us a bit, even when we're doing rock, he was like, get into the blues. What about the blues? So we had that kind of, and certainly rock comes from that blues sensibility. Anyway, the more kind of, heavy rock and Led Zeppelin kind of rock. So, yeah, I think there was always that kind of sense of timeline. And also being in London, out on the King's Road, and part of this, you were able to see it all, and you could see the embodiments and the background and the roots all being reflected, and not just in music, but in film and comedy and dress and fashion. So it was this kind of multi-dimensional experience of many different facets. So I think maybe there is something about being in that time and that place that kind of embodied maybe a more richer appreciation and a sense of curiosity. But the hard thing is that when I start, to play my own music and start to create my own thing, rather than being inspired by the others, and start to think about, well, what am I going to do and how am I going to make my imprint? that you have to really start to go into yourself, actually, a deeper element of kind of crystallizing who you are, having understood all these influences and techniques and comparing yourself to others. It's like, who am I? And my first thing was pretty much as a guitarist, the guitar was my thing. And so really I was, when I listened to music, I'd be listening to, when I was, between the ages of 6 and 13, I'm listening to the songs and the melody and the whole thing. But then suddenly it's like when I'm into the guitar, it's like I'm listening to the guitar solos, the guitar riff, and how they all kind of interplay. I wasn't very good at kind of, knocking off the lyrics or repeating them. So that became our obsession and fascination with all my classmates. We kind of got into the guitar and we just sort of got into these guitarists. And that's where Jimi Hendrix comes into play and Jimmy Page and then I got into kind of more jazz rock fusion as well. I was kind of getting to kind of more virtuosity stuff. And then, that was that kind of crazy guitar period. So, but I, just going back to the original question, I think there's something about music, this universal language that, as they say, the ear is the first sense organ to be developed in the womb. So the ear is the thing that kind of connects us and communicates us with the world. So maybe, I think there's just a sense of appreciating that timeless source. And so the other thing I want to say is I was around when Led Zeppelin or David Bowie came into the shop, or the Rolling Stones came into the shop, or a few came to the parties, and I was able to see them live. So I was able to see them maybe in their more kind of matured, they're really at the kind of height of their maturity beyond, being young men who had just sort of exploded on the scene. So I think I was able to take on that whole, period in seeing,
you were able to see Plant get fitted for stretched jeans by your dad.
Okay. Well, I have another story with Robert Plant. I didn't actually see him get fitted with stretched jeans, but let's keep that. Let's not let that get
That's hilarious.
The story, right? But so I met these guys. I saw them, and it's sort of you're kind of you're fusing with that entity and who they represent. And sometimes it was disappointing. You had this great hero that you'd sort of put up on a mantle, and then you meet them, and they're not quite the the massive god that you think that their charisma or their personality or their it just really is actually a shadow of what you expected. And there were
they're just experiencing the apathy of the Bardo apathy during that particular day that you met them.
Absolutely. But when you're 15 years old, you don't kind of like extrapolate and go into all those different dimensions. It's like, oh, fuck, I thought Jimmy Page would be a lot more kind of amazing, because actually I did see Led Zeppelin. I saw them, and when I was 15, we went to Nebworth. There were 200,000 of us there, and that was our first truly detestable summer festival in Britain. You could never rely on the weather. So, but that was our sort of schoolboys sort of first kind of outing to the big thing. But it's wonderful to be able to say I saw Led Zeppelin.
God damn! You actually saw Bonham, which Fred cannot say. Fred has a story. Fred has a story here, but I want to stick with the
And then later on, I actually ended up opening for Robert Plant at the Hammersmith Odeon in London, and the Hammersmith Odeon, now called the Hammersmith Apollo, was where I would we'd go and see all our bands. So I saw AC/DC and Thin Lizzy, and then there was a whole kind of rock revolution there. So I saw these bands at their height, and so it was, I don't know, it didn't feel separate, it didn't feel tight. But just to round this off, it was only really after I sort of got round sort of being the guitarist and guitar hero and going for that, then I started thinking about the band and songs and writing songs and actually being a singer and actually presenting a whole kind of musical, experience, that I started to get into more the nuances of the singers and the songwriting and the productions and how they all came together. So I really only fully appreciated, Bowie and Bryan Ferry and even T-Rex to an extent and some of those kind of bigger artists, kind of more in my sort of late teen, early mid 20s. And that started to kind of evolve a whole other appreciation and kind of canvas of putting music together. And, I made it a point of really, with those artists, is really digging into, their past history. And usually it's the first or second albums that they've done that usually were the best, and, that just completely free, spontaneous kind of artistic approach before they sort of, refine their particular sound that really. So, yeah, I think, music, it's an eternal experience. It is actually the life force, and it is the embodiment of the life force and history of the universe itself. Because it starts with rhythm, it starts with sound, and it starts with vibration. And essentially, we're all connected to it. Whether our senses are open or not, it's kind of up to us to, choose and decide how we want to work with it and share it in its various forms.
Now let's fast forward to 2021, because I want to talk a bit about
taking hours.
By the way,
are there any Motley Crue fans here and listeners?
Oh,
most of them are dead of overdose.
They've all OD'd. They've all OD'd.
Yeah, most of them heroin overdoses.
2021. I want to talk about, because the sound, finding that sound, you're talking about a little bit. You were referring to discovering your sound with all of these influences, and I know that as a musician myself, I know that that's an ongoing process, and it's a process that normally cannot be discovered in isolation. It normally requires at least one producer, maybe more, to be able to sort of hone who this is, that from an objective perspective, who James Golding is in 2021 from that objective perspective. Is there an influence that has come into your world? Are you self-produced? Did you have a producer work with you on your new album? It's beautifully orchestrated. It's beautifully arranged. It's a real work of art. So who was involved with helping you to find this 2021 sound?
Thank you. This is a great question. I think you'll be surprised to know that some of the music on the Supernatural Glam album was actually recorded like before 10 years ago.
Really?
Some of these tracks, the foundations, the basic kind of elements were laid down actually before I came to the US, which I've been in the US and California now, LA for 11 years. So some of the ideas and the formulas and the kind of music and songs and even the lyrics was sort of, had their basis quite a long time ago. And literally I have spent the last 10 years, just tracking on top and creating the layers and carving the sound and also adding, modern sort of electronic elements as well. Most of the album and the basics of it were recorded in an analog, real live instruments, almost like real live desks, some of it even on 2-inch tape. And it was like, that sensibility with other musicians as well in the room. And we sort of created and carved that sound. But I would say that I always had the overriding vision. I would, share that with the engineers and the musicians. And I would, play them references of either previous recordings that I'd done and saying, this is the kind of thing I want to do, but maybe, these are the elements, and let's get this. Or I would give them references of Bowie or Bryan Ferry or Mark Bolan or the Beatles, and just as a sort of, and then we'd find maybe modern influences as well, modern derivatives of the bands that were sort of presenting this new sound to the latest generations, to try and keep it sort of, current and relevant and relatable. And that has been my constant struggle, to take the elements of what I have. Also, I'm very versatile because I've done, as a guitarist, I can play jazz and blues and more, other stuff. As a singer, I'm pretty versatile there as well. I've also been in different bands and different projects. So it's like, who am I? What is my sound? Not even just what is my sound, but, what's the message? What are the lyrics? How do I want to present this in a sort of coherent package? And so, this 2021 sound is actually the, crystallization of a lot of years and a lot of work. But I definitely had a vision, and, I'd find the musicians or engineers or co-producers to kind of help just carve it, because technologically I'm not as proficient, I think, as just being able to kind of come up with the idea and the vision. So again, I think that's been my wisdom and my leadership quality, to sort of bring and harness all the different elements together and try and sort of keep the whole machine running, which is a whole other discussion and skill and exercise in and of itself. But on a musical level, the other thing, and I have to say now that some of these tracks were finished a few years back, but it didn't feel like they were resonant, relevant, or even current. I felt that I was always 10 years behind the trend, the fashion, the kind of like the zeitgeist, the tastemakers, the kind of music that people were listening to, and also this kind of revolution in music now, where everything's become so digitized and easily accessible, and everybody can make music. There is so much stuff out there. So how do I, this music or this stuff that, permeated from London's, and my character and my journey, sort of find its place within that kind of ocean of waves and possibilities. So the exciting thing about this kind of 2021 release of Supernatural Glam is it feels absolutely in rhythm and right with maybe the shifts and the paradigms that are happening in society. And it's not just about the music, it's about the experience, it's about the carving of a deep, rich world and the boldness from which to sort of present it. And I think the frequency and the energetic aspect of me being, of that enthusiasm and commitment is what the environment responds to. The environment is a response of our own, whatever intentions and frequencies. I very much believe that. And this is, so 2021 is the year of Supernatural Glam. And I'm still experimenting with how people are responding to this, and whether I know it's relevant for the people that may have a connection with this kind of music like we do, but does a 20-year-old or millennial or be able to connect with it and relate to it in a way that we might, because of our references? Is there something underlyingly universal that people feel? So this is still, the road to success is still under construction. And as Winston Churchill said, success is moving from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. So really, that's what I've been doing, moving from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. And suddenly it's like something seems to be resonating now.
That was like, look, I think we've done 9 shows, and that was just one of the most encapturing, compelling soliloquies, and we've even teased around this word soliloquy in a previous show, that I've heard. And it was, what I got as a listener and as a friend, as a fellow explorer and whatever this is that's coming our way, is I really got to how you got to be who you are now. I really was able to see how this album, or this piece of extraordinary work, got created, and how it takes from multiple different time frames, including before you were born, including your generation before you were born. Really, we tease around a little bit about the apathetic Bardos and the psychedelic experiences of this particular incarnation, but you really get a generational hereditary impact in who you were when you were born already, who you then got to be. And then, as the article that you so kindly sent us before you came on shows us, that you're not playing small. You're just bringing the whole kit and caboodle right now to Supernatural Glam, which actually sits as an anthem for 2021, given who you have been and who you are now. So I deeply thank you for the history that you gave and the capacity to, get right in with, the skin tight pants that you're wearing that ends up creating this actual beautiful piece of music. And I dearly appreciate who you are as a human, as a son, as a Brit, as a musician, as a man, as a friend, and all those things. And I really feel like, our listeners likely share a capacity to have really learned about the genesis of supernatural glam in such a glorious way. And I deeply, deeply appreciate and thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you for resonating and reflecting, these themes and this journey. I think that's the most important thing that we can share and encourage and inspire people with. And everybody has their own place and journey and mission, in this world. So as Mark Twain said, the two most important days of your life, the day you were born and the day you realize why you were born. And so, being born is sort of easy, but the rest is like understanding why. And that's an ever evolving, exercise and exploration. But there are times when suddenly something happens, something clicks and you just have to follow that path, no matter what obstacles or limitations, and keep forging and carving your path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that's really amazing. So, and thanks for bringing some intellectual legitimacy into this discussion by quoting both Churchill and Twain within 3 minutes of each other. That's really, really, to cross the ocean and deliver one from that side and one from this side, and really spectacular work to just, draw it all together. Sam, it's been a deep pleasure. And I see you sitting here, not wanting to end this one. And I don't want to either.
End this one. No, this is painful. This is a painful one to end.
So how about this? I think we got to at least start tapering down. How about that? I mean, there's only so many tracks left that we got to fill. So I'm good for another, 3 or 5 minutes. I do have something at the bottom of the hour I have to get to. So it's, James, what's the future of music? There's one question I want to add. And how did we get this far without it saying anything about Pink Floyd is another question I want to add. And the third question is, who's the best guitarist that ever lived?
Okay. Future of music is here and now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we discussed what that means earlier in the show.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The future of music and the future of art depends on heroes of humanity and champions of humanity awakening to their mission and actually digging into the depths of this glorious opportunity of life itself and sharing it with others beyond just entertaining, but actually creating, with the intention to awaken and inspire humanity. That is the future of music.
Referencing a little bit the Leonard Bernstein quote that made it into that article, right?
Yes.
Like when pressed, we create music.
Yes, but I think also artists or musicians or entertainers have learned to become businessmen, because now it's a music business and it's the art business. And I think the next step, we've had to be very versatile and adaptable, entrepreneurial, just to sort of survive and keep doing what we do. But I think the next step and evolution for us artists, but also humanity, is really engaging in our mission, knowing that culture and art can actually, is more important than just being a decoration. It can actually move people's hearts and create substance for people's lives. So I think as artists who are businessmen and entrepreneurial or businesswomen, to actually move to that next stage of my mission is to heal, communicate, serve and inspire humanity. I think that's the future of music and art. And maybe 2021 in our sort of COVID year and this sort of global pandemic where people are absolutely yearning for connection and communication is the year that, the year where this suddenly starts to have more significance and importance. So I'm thrilled to be able to, say that I think supernatural glam is the future of music too.
Beautiful.
And there we go.
As
far as Pink Floyd is concerned, I did mention.
Were they part of your life? Was that part of your life?
I mentioned Pink Floyd in the as we were rolling around in the Mini Cooper S, and absolutely love Pink Floyd and the kind of the psychedelic symphonic nature. One of my best gigs, actually, where I was sort of crying most of the gig, just the lyrics and just the way everything was. I think there's this kind of a deep.
When I took my tour, I took a Rolls Royce tour around London. A Rolls Royce rock and roll tour with this dude. Yeah. And that guy is so cool. That guy is like the coolest. And he showed us where Pink Floyd's first did their first song, and we went to Jimmy Page's house and all that. Anyway, and now finally, the question among questions. You must get asked this every so often. Is there the best guitarist of all time, and who would that be? The best rock and roll guitarist of all time.
Okay, so we're specifying rock and roll guitar as opposed
we have to do that.
Jazz.
There's only one right answer.
It has to be Jimi Hendrix. Okay. It has to be Jimi Hendrix, just because the way what he did and what he presented, and it wasn't just about the guitars, the whole symphony and the color and the love. The love. Not to say that I'm necessarily, Jimi Hendrix is necessarily my favorite guitarist, but just as a sort of like the person that bought
the impact.
The guitar. But I'm going to give you my 5 top guitarists because you asked, and I'm sure the audience is asking.
It's good.
My 5 top are Jeff Beck, just because of
Jeff Beck.
The style.
Talked about him
as a guitarist. The other one is Mick Ronson. David Bowie, kind of seminal part of the David Bowie sound and the glam sound. Mick Ronson's guitar just had so much kind of flavors, and kind of, it was a producer's guitarist. It just the way the sound there. Jimi Hendrix is there, of course. And in terms of like real guitar technique and the modern technique, Eddie Van Halen. And then there's Steve Lukather from Toto, but pretty much played on everything. Just loved his style and virtuosity.
I like that 5. I like that 5.
Wow, Sam, it's like wham, bam, thank you, glam, all right?
Damn. Those stories did not disappoint.
Not at all.
That was amazing.
Just so much fun to be with him. I mean, it's like, damn.
Can you imagine growing up in the late 60s and 70s and seeing like people from The Who and Zeppelin and Pink Floyd just come in and out of your dad's shop? And I mean, what?
It's just so great. I know. He just is so sweet and so strong. And you know what? He does really deliver a hard-hitting message in that music and in his conversation. So
he is a super glam human being. Be sure, everyone listening, be sure to check him out, James Golding. And if you like this conversation, one of the best ways for us to continue to get these really great guests is by a lot of people liking our show. So if you're one of those people who like our show, please hit the like button, please leave a comment, and in fact, you could subscribe. It would be really cool to do that too. So really help us out, and it would help out the show. What do you say? And we'll help you out. You help us out, we'll help you out. Give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe, and we promise to have more fantastic guests like James Golding on.
It was super great. All right, Sam, we'll catch you on the flip side. Let's see who's coming next.